The HOA president planted a bright white notice of community acquisition sign into my grandpa's dirt, while people were still filing past me at his wake, and I remember staring at that sign like my brain couldn't translate what my eyes were seeing. I didn't yell, I didn't swing, I didn't do any of the things a younger version of me would have done. I just stood there with my hands clenched around a paper cup of church coffee, thinking this cannot be real. A week later, in front of 300 neighbors, I hit play on a recovered video clip and watched that same woman go pale, scream deepfake, then get walked out in handcuffs, while half the room blamed me for the chaos she created. Yeah, that happened. My name's Cole Bennett. I'm 34. I live in Phoenix most of the year, and I'm not telling you this because I think I'm some hero. I'm telling you because I spent a long time being the guy people assume is selfish, absent, dramatic, the out-of-state grandson who only shows up when there's something to inherit. You know what I mean? And I learned the hard way that if you don't fight for the truth, somebody with better stationery and a sweeter smile will rewrite it for you. My grandpa, Earl Bennett, lived in a small town in Virginia called Maple Hollow. And when I say small, I mean the kind of place where the diner waitress knows your name, even if you haven't been back in 10 years. The kind of place where everybody waves until they're mad at you. Earl ran an apple orchard on a ridgeline outside town. Not huge by corporate standards, but big enough to feel like a world. When you're a kid, rows and rows of trees, an old barn that smelled like hay and oil, a farmhouse kitchen where the coffee was always too strong and there was always something simmering on the stove. I was raised there in patches, summers, and holidays. Then life pulled me west. Work, rent deadlines. The usual excuses that sound reasonable until they don't. And then, one October morning, my aunt called and said, "Cole, Grandpa's gone," and the words didn't land. At first, they just floated like my brain refused to accept the weight of them. I drove home with that weird, numb adrenaline you get when you're grieving and functioning at the same time, and by the time I pulled into Maple Hollow, the leaves were half off the trees, and the air had that sharp edge, like winter was lurking behind the next sunrise. The wake was at our church, the old stone one, with the creaky floors, and the basement that always smells like wet coats, and I was standing up front trying to be the strong one, shaking hands, hugging people I hadn't seen since high school, hearing the same sentences on loop. He was a good man. He loved you. He was proud of you. And every time someone said it, I felt this sting because I hadn't been around enough to earn it, not lately. Then, tires crunched on gravel outside, and it cut through the room like a knife through a soft conversation, and I watched through the window as a black SUV rolled up like it owned the place. Out stepped a woman in a cream blazer and heels that had no business on mud hair, perfectly set sunglasses on, even though it was overcast, followed by a guy in a polo shirt carrying a metal post and a clipboard. I didn't recognize her at first, but I recognized the posture. That posture some people have where they take up space like they paid for the air. She walked right toward me like the wake was an appointment on her calendar. "Cole Bennett," she said. And I remember how calm her voice was, like she was offering condolences at a charity brunch. "I'm Marlene Voss, president of Silver Pines Ridge HOA. I'm sorry for your loss." She didn't wait for a response. She glanced past me at the memorial photos like they were decor. "We're posting notice on the Bennett Ridge corridor today." I blinked hard. Posting notice? Today? At a wake? She smiled a tight little smile. "Your grandfather signed an annexation and transfer agreement," she said, like she was explaining a household rule to a child. "This is procedural." She held out a manila folder like it was a gift. I opened it and saw a one-page document claiming my grandpa voluntarily transferred management authority over the Ridge Access Corridor to the HOA for $10 for community benefit. And the first thing I did was scan the bottom for a notary stamp, because I've signed enough things in life to know what real paperwork looks like. There was nothing. No notary, no witness, signatures, no county recording info, just a shaky signature that kind of looked like Earl's name and a smudged thumbprint. My stomach went cold. I looked up at her. "This isn't notarized," I said. "There aren't witnesses." Marlene tilted her head, like she felt sorry for me. "Earl was very clear," she said. "He wanted to leave a legacy." And then she lowered her voice and added, "He warned me you might be emotional. Try not to make this ugly." That line right there is when I realized she'd rehearsed this, like she'd practiced telling a grieving grandson to behave. I stepped closer and said low, "Get off this property." She didn't even blink. She turned slightly and nodded at her clipboard guy. "Place it by the driveway entrance." And that's when I saw what the metal post was for, because the guy walked down the church steps and started hammering a bright white sign into the ground next to the gravel drive that led to my grandpa's orchard. Notice of community acquisition, Silver Pines. Ridge HOA, big black letters, clean and bold, like a flag. People coming out of the church stopped mid-step. My aunt's face did this slow collapse. Someone whispered, "Is that legal?" Marlene didn't care. She adjusted her sunglasses, turned back to me, and said, "We'll be in touch," like she was talking about a bake sale. Then she walked away, heels sinking into the mud, not once looking at the casket, not once acknowledging the man. Everyone was there to mourn. I stood there shaking with this mix of grief and rage and disbelief, thinking, "Grandpa, what did they do while I was gone?" Because here's the thing, my grandpa wasn't naive. He was stubborn, sharp, the kind of old man who could sniff out a scam from across the county line. So the idea that he just signed away anything for $10 didn't make sense, not even a little. The next morning proved Marlene wasn't playing. At 6:12 a.m., someone pounded on the farmhouse door like they were executing a warrant. I opened it in sweatpants, and there was a guy in a polo shirt holding a tablet like it was scripture. "HOA compliance," he announced, and he handed me a paper fine for $500 because my truck was parked in my grandpa's gravel turnout. "This lane is under HOA authority now," he said, pointing down the driveway like he'd mapped my childhood into a spreadsheet. I actually laughed, because what else do you do when something is that ridiculous? He shrugged. "Take it up with President Voss." Before noon, a certified letter arrived from the HOA attorney, a man named Gerald Larkin, and it said I had 14 days to vacate pending completion of the transfer, or I would face trespass charges and civil penalties. And I just sat there on the porch steps, reading that word over and over. Trespass. As if I was some stranger squatting in a place where my grandpa taught me how to throw a baseball. I did what normal people do. I went to the sheriff. Sheriff Wade Dugan was in his 50s belly, straining a little against his uniform, and he took one look at the HOA letterhead and leaned back like he already knew how this would go. "Marlene runs a tight ship," he said. I told him about the wake sign, the missing notary, the fine at sunrise. He gave me that bored half nod. "Sounds civil," I said. "It sounds like theft." He looked at me like I was being dramatic. "You live out of state, son," he said. "Handle it in court." And I knew walking out of that office that he was going to call Marlene, because that's how small towns work when power gets cozy. That night, I sat at my grandpa's kitchen table with the light buzzing overhead, staring at his old wall calendar. And it felt like being punched in the chest because his handwriting was still there. Little notes like pick apples and fix fence, and right there on the 3rd week of the month. Call Cole and I hadn't called enough. I opened his desk drawer, looking for anything, any clue, and I found an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a torn note, written in his shaky but clear hand. If someone starts showing up with tea and paperwork, check the trail cam in the barn loft. Don't trust them. The word tea was in quotes like he wanted me to hear it the way he heard it, like it was code for something else. I swear my skin went cold. I ran out to the barn at dawn, climbed into the loft coughing through dust, and found the trail cam wedged behind a feed sack. The memory card was inside. Hope hit me so hard, I almost laughed. Then I got to my laptop and realized most of the recent files were deleted, like somebody had gone in and cleaned the scene. I stood there, staring at the empty folder, feeling my throat tighten, because it meant 2 things at once. 1, my grandpa was right. And 2, someone had already been here after he died digging. That's when Evelyn Blake, the neighbor who'd known my grandpa forever, walked in, like she had been waiting for me to find the truth. She didn't waste time on comfort. "They've been circling him," she said. "That woman in the cream blazer. I saw her here every week. Earl would be sharp in the morning and foggy by afternoon." I asked, did he say anything? Evelyn shook her head. "He didn't like to admit he needed help," she said. But I know what I saw. Then she handed me a business card for a lawyer named Tessa Hart and said, "You need someone who isn't scared of letterhead." Tessa listened to my story, and the first thing she said wasn't sympathy. It was strategy. If your grandpa transferred anything she said, it would be recorded. We're checking the recorder's office today. At the county recorder, the clerk typed the parcel number and frowned. "No deed transfer," he said. "No easement recorded to the HOA. Nothing." He looked at Marlene's paper and snorted. This wouldn't survive a lazy judge. So why were they acting like it was done? Because they expected me to panic and leave. Because grief makes people tired and polite people get bulldozed. Tessa introduced me to a data recovery guy named Jalen Price. He looked at the trail cam card and said, "Deleted doesn't mean gone. It means someone wanted you to believe it's gone." A couple hours later, he called me, and his voice was different, quieter. "I pulled fragments," he said. He sent 3 clips. The first one showed Marlene in my grandpa's kitchen, holding a stainless thermos, smiling like she was doing him a favor. "Earl, it's herbal tea," she said. "Helps you sleep." My grandpa's voice in the background sounded tired. The second clip made my stomach knot. My grandpa was sitting at the table, word slurring, head dipping, and Marlene slid papers toward him like she was sliding a menu. "Just sign here, sweetie," she said. "Community paperwork." She guided his hand. Guided it. The third clip was short, but it changed everything, because Marlene laughed and said to someone off camera, "Once the ridge corridor is secured, Horizon Crest cuts the board their fee. We're on a clock." Horizon Crest was the developer plastering the county with glossy banners, promising modern living in Maple Hollow, and suddenly the wake sign made 6 cents. They weren't honoring my grandpa. They were racing a deadline, and he was the last obstacle. I felt this weird combination of relief and nausea, because at least I wasn't crazy. At least the pieces fit. But the reality of what it meant was worse than confusion. It meant someone had targeted him. Marlene escalated fast when Tessa sent a cease and desist. An HOA tow truck tried to hook my Tacoma in my driveway. HOA security installed a keypad gate across the dirt track up to the ridge and emailed me access hours like they were the landlord and I was the tenant. Then Marlene called me herself. Sweet voice, smiling through the phone. "Cole." "You're stressed," she said. "Let's resolve this," I said. "You drugged him." There was a half-beat of silence. Then she laughed. "Don't be dramatic," she said. Earl was anxious. I helped him relax. Tessa mouthed at me to keep her talking, so I asked, "Why did he need to relax before signing?" Marlene's voice went flatter, colder. "Because progress is stressful for people who don't understand it." She said, then she told me to meet her at the HOA office alone, like she was doing me a favor. She offered me $120,000 if I signed a release admitting the transfer was valid, and promised to make the fines disappear. When I asked why she would pay if she was so legal, she said, "Because you're inconvenient." And then she hit me with the real weapon. "You don't want to be the guy who ruins a neighborhood," she said. "That's how people like her operate. They don't just threaten you. They try to make you feel ashamed for resisting." That night, Jalen found more. He recovered cached emails from my grandpa's old desktop, a thread titled Maple Hollow Phase 2. Ridge Corridor closing. And it was like looking behind a curtain. Horizon Crest staff talking about consulting fees to HOA leadership timelines, contingency language, and then Marlene replying in plain English, "I'll handle Earl personally. He won't know what he signed." I stared at that line until my eyes burned. I didn't sleep. I sat there thinking about my grandpa's hands. Hands that planted trees and fixed engines, and held mine when I was a kid, and guided into signing away his ridge while he was fogged out. And I felt something hard settle in my chest. Not just anger, responsibility. Because I was the only person left who was going to speak for him. Silver Pines Ridge's annual meeting was Tuesday night. The clubhouse was packed, 300 people folding chairs. Cheap cookies, that electric buzz you get when a crowd senses something is about to happen. Marlene sat up front like a queen hair perfect smile ready, and she ran through the usual HOA nonsense budget updates, community standards. Then she pulled up glossy renderings of a scenic overlook on the ridge and promised property values would soar. People nodded like she was selling salvation. Then she did something that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. She turned the room toward me. "We have disruption from a non-resident family member," she said. "Someone who hasn't been involved in Maple Hollow life for years, but suddenly wants to block progress." Heads turned like I'd confessed to stealing from the donation plate. I stood up. "Point of order." Marlene's smile tightened, but she nodded like she was granting me a privilege. "The floor recognizes Cole Bennett." I walked up front with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "My grandfather died 2 weeks ago," I said. "At his wake, this HOA posted acquisition notice on his land. Since then, I've been fined, threatened, and told to vacate property that has not been legally transferred." Marlene lifted a hand like a traffic cop. "Cole, this isn't the place for your grief." I looked right at her. "It became everyone's place when you brought business to my grandpa's wake." I nodded at Jalen, who was by the laptop, and he hit the video. First clip, Marlene with the thermos. Second clip, my grandpa slurring and her coaxing, guiding his hand. The room went so quiet I could hear someone inhale sharply. Then the third clip played, and Marlene's own voice filled the clubhouse, clear as day. Once the ridge corridor is secured, Horizon Crest cuts the board their fee. We're on a clock. You could feel the crowd change in real time like the air got heavier. Somebody shouted, "What the hell?" Marlene sprang up, face red. "Fake," she yelled. "Deep fake!" She lunged toward the projector table like she could unplug what everyone had just watched. Evelyn Blake stood up in the back and said loud, "I saw her at Earl's house every week," and a retired nurse stood and added, "He was fine until those visits." Marlene tried to pull the president voice back, but it was slipping. The questions turned into accusations, and then Marlene snapped, because pressure cracks people, and what came out of her mouth was the truth she'd been hiding under politeness. "You don't understand," she shouted. "That land is wasted. An old man sitting on acres while families need homes." And there was this tiny moment right after she said it, where her eyes widened, because she realized she'd just admitted motive in front of everyone on camera in a room full of witnesses. The back doors opened. Sheriff Dugan walked in with 2 state investigators. The room went dead silent, like somebody hit mute on the world. One investigator held up a folder. "Marlene Voss. He said you are under arrest for exploitation of an elderly adult fraud and conspiracy." Marlene backed up, hands half raised, still trying to perform. "This is a misunderstanding," she whispered, and nobody moved to save her. The cuffs clicked around her wrists, a small final sound, and she twisted toward me with this pure hatred that wasn't even personal. It was the hatred of someone who can't stand losing control. "You just ruined this neighborhood," she hissed. And here's the part that still messes with me. Half the room looked at her like she was a monster, and half the room looked at me like I was the monster. People started shouting, "Not at Marlene," at me. "Our dues are gonna skyrocket. You could have taken the money and kept this quiet. Now we're all gonna pay." And other people shouted back, She drugged an old man. He's dead, and she used him. This is what happens when you let one person run things for too long. Marlene was walked out past 300 neighbors. She'd smiled at for years, and as the doors closed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you won? Enjoy paying the price." I stood there with my hands shaking, not because I regretted hitting play, but because I realized the truth doesn't always make you popular. It just makes you right. And that's where I want to hand it to you, because I know exactly what the comments section is going to do with this. If you were me, would you take the hush money and disappear so the neighborhood stays peaceful, even if it means the next lonely old man gets handled personally too? Or would you hit play in public and let the fallout land where it lands, even if people who did nothing wrong end up paying a price because they empowered the wrong person? And one more question, because this one is messy. Should innocent homeowners get stuck with the financial consequences of what their board did? Or is that the only way communities finally pay attention to who they put in charge? Drop your take below. Tell me if you think I did the right thing. Tell me if you think I should have played it differently. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that went power hungry. I want to hear your story too, because I'm starting to believe these things don't stop until regular people stop staying quiet.